Known as the Yellow Rose of Texas, David Von Erich was poised for superstardom pretty much from his debut. He absolutely got the in-ring psychology, the promos. He absolutely knew how to draw you in, whether it was a face as a heel. He could be intense. He could be very, very soft-spoken, but he had that fire, that absolute fire, that uncoachable it factor that you either have it or you don't have it. He wrestled in World-Class Championship Wrestling. He wrestled in Florida. He wrestled in Missouri, in All Japan Pro Wrestling, and he was poised to possibly, maybe, probably become an NWA World Heavyweight Champion because he faced off against Harley Race and Ric Flair numerous times, and he just absolutely got it. You look at David Von Erich in the ring, and he just absolutely got it. And also, he was a good mind behind the scenes. He learned from his dad. He learned from other people. He was ready to be one of, if not the guy, for a while. And then, unfortunately, on February 10th, 1984, in Tokyo, Japan, he passed away. Very, very tragic. Very, very shocking. Wrestlers, fans, everybody. The wrestling world was absolutely floored. And even though it did lead to the biggest house of World-Class Championship Wrestling with Draw in Texas Stadium, David Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions, it would also lead to a quicker downfall. So the question is, what if David Von Erich had been able to address the medical issues that led to his unfortunate and quick passing well before his time? What if he had been able to live on? How would things have been different? Where would his career have gone? Where would World-Class Championship Wrestling have gone? Let's talk about it all, shall we? I'm John Rethnam with my real honest thoughts on what if David Von Erich had not passed away in 1984. So, obviously as somebody that was not watching World-Class Championship Wrestling at the time, I caught a little bit of the stuff on syndication way later when the promotion was on its ass, well after David Von Erich had passed away, well after a lot of talents passed away. Gino Hernandez, I will do a video on Gino Hernandez at some point. Looking back on it, David Von Erich really could have been the big breakout star. And that's no disrespect to Kevin, who's incredibly talented. Kerry Von Erich, I may do one on Kerry Von Erich at some point because there's a lot of what-if scenarios and you have to wonder how different wrestling would be if these things hadn't happened. Obviously, David Von Erich would have needed to get any substance abuse issues that he had under control. And he had that gastric enteritis, I believe is what it was. There are some people who say that. Some people say it was a heart attack. Some people say it was an overdose. I mean, the medical examiner brought back the actual result, but everybody's always going to have their, conspiracy theories. But he had an abrasion on his lower intestine that led to a lot of issues. So I don't know how the hell he was able to wrestle with that. Oh, he boozed and pilled up and everything. Not that he was the only one. But yeah, dying on foreign soil, I mean, the Japanese fans love the Von Erichs. I mean, when a foreigner passes away, they want to make sure that they aren't as cold as ice. They aren't willing to sacrifice their passion for professional wrestling. I'm sorry, it was right there. I had to say it. Don't hate me. But they held a memorial for him. And then the funeral in Texas, it shut down the town. The particular area, they had to have big screens out there so people could witness it, big speakers. They had to witness, they wanted to witness because Texas got hurt that day. And then it did lead to the biggest house, but geez. But let's talk about his career. So, part of the Von Erich dynasty, it was him, Kevin, I believe, is the oldest. But it was him, Kevin, I mean, there was Jack Atkinson Jr., because that is Fritz's actual last name. And what ended up happening is Jack Atkinson Jr. passed away because he got electrocuted on the tongue of a trailer or something and ended up falling in the snow and dying. And there was Kevin, David, Kerry, there was Chris, or there was Mike, then there was Chris. But David made his wrestling debut just at the age of 18, just before his 19th birthday on the 17th of June in 77. And he quickly rose up. He was obviously going to be seen as a great talent. And you could see even from an early age, yes, everybody has to learn, but he had those genetics in him to be a great face in Texas or even a great heel elsewhere. Because David was probably the one of the kids that could have worked as a heel because he absolutely got it. Faced Harley Race early on, and shortly after his debut, a couple months after his debut. Him and Harley Race had a series of great matches, at least from the footage I've seen. He got over in Missouri and even beat Harley in a non-title match, and this was in 79, so he was rising up. And if you think about it, his career lasted under 7 years, because from June of 77 to February of 84. So he packed a lot into a near 7-year career. It was a non-title match, though. Vince McMahon Sr., Vince McMahon Jr. liked the Von Erichs because he even made a Madison Square Garden debut for the Worldwide Wrestling Federation in November of 79. He went to Florida in 81. They were sending him out because that's the thing that people, maybe some people don't understand, and even myself included, because I'm right around that age where the NWA was really starting to go away because territories were starting to get swallowed up or just go out of business and everything, because I was born in 81. But seeing how David would continue to rise up, he eventually was being sent to other territories, like to Florida, to work under Eddie Graham, and he worked as a heel. And he could have worked as a heel, even in Texas. He could have been the one guy that could have done it. Would have really, really needed to do it right, but that being said, Dory Funk Jr. was his mentor. He worked with various people, Sweet Brown Sugar, Barry Windham, and a few other people. And by early 82, or mid 82, he was back, but he got a chance to get experience in Florida. And working for Eddie Graham was certainly something that everybody, would have wanted to do at that time, especially when Eddie Graham had his faculties about him. He met Jimmy Garvin, Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin, later Jimmy Jam Garvin, but Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin is a better way to remember him, because that's actually when he wasn't juiced up out to the goddamn max and trying to be a badass, when he was there as a chicken shit heel. But he met him in Florida and said, hey, Jimmy, you need to come to World Class. So he did sometime in 83. Now, meanwhile, David, being back in July of 82, he got to work with the Freebirds, who had gotten over in Bill Watts' territory, and was it Continental Alabama? I know it was Georgia. They were on Georgia TV. Various timeline differences, but they had teamed, like Harry had even done, some excursions and done stuff at the heel, but it was just him wearing shades, probably because he was blasted out of his goddamn mind. But in 82, they were setting up the whole thing for the Freebirds to eventually turn on the Von Erichs. That being said, let's talk about that Jimmy Garvin feud, where they competed over the NWA Texas Heavyweight Championship and over the ownership of Sunshine. Basically, David Von Erich won a match where Sunshine had to be his valet for a day, and that led to more consternation and more non-finishes to build up to eventually, the feud ending with the Texas Heavyweight Championship being on the line on July 4th, 1983. And him and Jimmy Garvin, from the footage I've seen, clips from TV and everything, great matches, and, laid their shit in, because Jimmy Garvin was a great, chicken shit heel, and David was just great as a fiery kid of Fritz Von Erich that was becoming a man, was rising up, had faced off against Ric Flair, rather. And David Von Erich was really gaining the most attention. It's not that Kevin wasn't. It's not that Kerry wasn't. Because Kerry looked like a Greek god. I don't think he had a goddamn clue how to put two and two together, but looked like a Greek god. And David helped put angles together backstage like the Freebirds. Now, I'm not saying he was the only one. Michael Hayes had some ideas, because this is an involvement where everybody wanted to do their stuff, but David knew what would draw, and he understood where wrestling was going at that time, and Fritz trusted his kids, let his kids do that. The Freebirds versus the Von Erich, one of the most iconic feuds in wrestling. The most iconic feud in World Class Championship Wrestling, at least. I think, at least in the glory days. I'm not saying there weren't other feuds, even after, World Class business started to go down. I'm not saying there weren't other great feuds, but Freebirds and the Von Erichs, rather. Parsons and Buddy Roberts, they were very good. Iceman King Parsons and Buddy Roberts over the Freebird Hair Cream. Garvin and David Von Erich. Kamala coming in. There were a lot, really good cooking feuds and everything, and David was the centerpiece of it, even though there were other people on the periphery, and there was other shit going on. David Von Erich was the centerpiece. He was the centerpiece. He was going to be the guy. He faced off against David Flair. That would have been interesting. He faced off against Ric Flair in the fall of 83 into 84. Even won the NWA Missouri Heavyweight Championship from Flair on September 16th of 83, and then dropped it to Harley in early January of 84. So he's continuing to roll. They had this angle set up where it was going to be David Flair, going against, or David Flair, sorry, I'm doing it again, David Von Erich, I apologize. He was going to face off against Rick. He really wanted another match against Rick, but Rick had knocked Mike Von Erich, who had just gotten into wrestling, and said, I can beat him with one arm behind my back. And they said, well, let's up it. How about we do a 10-minute challenge? If you can beat Mike, I can't get another shot. If Mike manages to survive that 10 minutes, I get another shot. Okay, that's cool. And they did that, and David would be able to name the stipulation because Mike was able to survive. Now, obviously, Flair could get the most out of anybody, even Mike Von Erich, who was not all that good. But what ended up happening is David was poised to get a shot sometime in April of 84. Obviously, since he died on February 10th, 1984, February's before April, that didn't happen. And he had, I think a match against Kamala in Oklahoma, I believe, if I remember right, just a few days before his death. They flew over to Tokyo for the All Japan show, and then he passed away. From various issues, there were people that thought he might have had bulimia because he, ate a lot, threw up, and then ate a lot more. Or maybe, but gastric enteritis seems to be the prevalent theme, and that's what it was. It was something that took his life way, way too soon. I mean, he was 25 years old. 25 years old. So, yeah, I mean, it led to the big, parade of champions in Texas Stadium where Kerry Von Erich beat Ric Flair to a tremendous roar. And the Von Erichs and Fritz, coming out of retirement, managed to beat the Freebirds for the 6-man championships. And that was cool. And there was a lot of great moments there. The thing is, though, what if David had lived on? Would David have beaten Ric Flair? Entirely possible. In fact, I think that David Flair probably would have beaten Ric in Texas Stadium. It would have been a big deal. Would it have been the biggest house? They probably could have drawn 20 to 25,000 people, I think, if they had really layered the card. And Fritz could have come out of retirement and still done that. And it could have been a big goddamn deal because Fritz had retired a couple years prior. But what could have happened? Well, actually, yeah. Let's see, he retired in 82. Yeah, a couple years later. I had to think about the timeline in my head because my world-class knowledge is kind of surface, as you can tell. You can study up on it, but if you didn't live through it, there's only so much you can know. David Flair could have beaten Ric. David Von Erich could have beaten Ric Flair. I think it's because World Championship Wrestling still dominates my mind, and the fact that David Flair did so much goddamn ridiculous stuff with the crowbar, and I'm not talking about Devon Storm and being all crazy and everything, and it scarred me for life, so that's why it's still in my head. But Mr. David Von Erich could have beaten Flair, held the championship for a bit, and him and Flair could have traded the whole thing for a while. And yeah, Kerry wouldn't have gotten his moment, but let's be perfectly honest, David would have been the better guy. That would have been contingent, of course, on him getting the the gastric enteritis taken care of and getting his substance abuse issues under control, and that goes for the entire world-class Championship Wrestling roster. But if David Von Erich had been able to be healthy and continue on that path, he could have been NWA champion in 84. Maybe he would have only been a one-time NWA champion, but it would have helped skyrocket the business. They wouldn't have gotten 45,000 people, 42,000 people, whatever the hell it was, in Texas Stadium, but they would have continued to have steady, consistent, and possibly spiking business for the Cotton Bowl extravaganzas, more Ever Union Arena. And world class, yes, it probably would have eventually gotten swallowed up. Maybe it would have flamed out even quicker. There's no way of really telling. But David Von Erich, as champion, could help take them to new heights. He could have defended it over in Japan. If he had dropped it to Flair in a few months, Flair could have then defended against Dusty. Because by that point, Jim Crockett Promotions was basically going to have a hold on the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. He could have still worked in Kansas City, even though that was on its ass. He could have worked in El Paso. If they had decided to make a working agreement with the AWA, David Von Erich could have done that. There could have been a whole bunch of different things they could have done. Florida, even though by early 85, Eddie Graham took his own life. Very tragic. David Von Erich could have done a whole lot of various territories. He could have he couldn't have helped kill any business in Georgia any worse than it was, because the Atlanta end of Jim Crockett Promotions was pretty much done by mid to late 85, basically late 85. But David Von Erich being a big star, it would have helped bolster world class and kept them going, because there wouldn't have been this tragedy rolling around. Now that, of course, would have been contingent. Hey, maybe Mike Von Erich has his issue, and that would have gotten him more sympathy because he would have come back. David would have still been around. David, Kerry, and Kevin could have been the three-man power trip, essentially. He could have still feuded with Jimmy Garvin. He could have feuded with other people they were bringing in. Tell me David Von Erich and Gino Hernandez would not have been money. David Von Erich versus Chris Adams turning heel. That would have been great. David was the guy. He was the centerpiece. Even though Kerry and Kevin helped keep World Class on fire, the bottom line is David's death pretty much led to the entire downfall of World Class, along with a few other things. Fritz not wanting to expand and take the TV elsewhere and film TV in other places, just go do house shows. Had he done the TV, that would have helped to make them even bigger stars. They could have had a co-promotion with Mid-South UWF because of where the territories TVs went. And what would have ended up happening? You could have had David Von Erich on Mid-South TV, possibly competing against Duggan, Butch Reed, maybe not Junkyard Dog, because I don't think you would have been able to turn him heel, and Junkyard Dog was gone by August of 84 to Vince anyway. David could have gone to Vince. If World Class had gone down at all, David Von Erich could have gone up to Vince. And now, would he have been more than mid-card? He could have been Intercontinental Champion. He could have gone to the NWA. He could have gone to Jim Crockett Promotions. He would have been a fine U.S. champion. Maybe a fine tag team champion if you would have put him and Barry Windham together. There are a lot of different scenarios that could have happened with David Von Erich as far as where he could have gone, but he would have at least been a one-time NWA champion, maybe just for a few months, maybe possibly till the end of 84. Because as great as Flair was, one of the best of all time, if David Von Erich had had a run from that April or even May, if they had decided to do a May Texas Stadium show, if they decided to do that and everybody was still alive, if he had won in front of that packed house and done some great moments, and had some great moments and matches since, and dropped it, say at the Thanksgiving Star Wars events, there's a Star Wars event in November, he would have had a 6-month run. He could have still been in competition, and he could have been loaned out to others, other territories, and still helped grow World Class Championship Wrestling. Fritz would have listened to David had he said, hey, let's take the TV elsewhere, because David would have had a good idea what to do. And who knows, they could have just made more shots and done something, because honestly, with how Vince was swallowing up everything, even though it was taking time, they could have worked with the Crockett's, or they could have worked with Mid-South. They could have done a whole bunch of this stuff. There are a lot of different scenarios that could have been in play had David Von Erich stayed around. But he would have gotten that run with the NWA title. However long it was is subject to debate. That being said, unfortunately, we'll never know, because he passed away on February 10th, 1984. Very, very tragic. Way too soon. I think he could have wrestled he could have wrestled at least into like 2000, 2001. He would have been just over 40 by that point, but he still could have kept wrestling. I don't know if he would have kept wrestling in WCW past, like, say, 95, but hey, he could have. Him versus Austin? Say he came up in the Attitude Era. I don't know if that would necessarily work. Him versus Austin would have been interesting. A lot of different things that could happen. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Recklin. I'll see you soon.